Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. The Alaska summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin ended after a 3-hour closed-door meeting with no concrete agreement on Ukraine. Despite Trump's calls for a ceasefire today and warnings of severe consequences, Putin received red carpets, military flyovers, and symbolic gestures, sending clear signals to the West and unsettling allies. From Lavrov's USSR sweatshirt to chicken Kyiv served on a Russian plane, the summit was full of subtle messages. We now speak with Mariya Zolkina, head of regional security and conflict studies and research fellow, to examine what the summit means for Ukraine, European allies, and the global balance of power. Thank you so much for joining us here in the studio.
Hello, thanks for the invitation.
So let's get the first reactions. Is this for Kyiv a sigh of relief, a sigh of frustration? Is it something else? What's the first reaction here?
Speaking in these terms, rather frustration and source of concern, I would say, because lack of concrete outcomes when it comes to the press conference doesn't mean that there was nothing unacceptable for Ukraine discussed during the meeting. And actually, lack of a deal on a ceasefire was pretty expectable, because Trump cannot take any decision instead of Ukraine or instead of European countries, which are to be supporters of Ukraine in case US is negotiator rather than a supporter of Ukraine at this point of view. So we assess the situation like there were the requirements and demands on the side of Putin, which he brought to Trump and which were discussed. And right now, these demands or these requests, which are pretty, we are aware of which actually, now being transmitted from Trump to European leaders and to President Zelensky. The source of concern is mainly that for Putin, it was necessary to show that he is allegedly agree to a ceasefire. However, he has his own conditions and terms of this ceasefire as precondition for his agreement. This is very important, not afterwards, just before his agreement to a ceasefire, some conditions to be fulfilled. On the side of Ukraine, some concessions. And for Putin, it was important to have a very sympathetic atmosphere, very loyal atmosphere of meeting with Trump, restore diplomatic relations, restore economic relations, at least to start this restoration now, and to show that this is Zelensky or Ukraine or coalition of willing are those to blame for lack of a ceasefire. And this is pretty realistic scenario, because we know what Russian demands are, and we do understand why Ukraine and coalition of willing and European partners of Ukraine generally think this is unacceptable ground for any agreement, even about a temporary ceasefire.
But also just the optics. I mean, you have Vladimir Putin, who's wanted by the ICC for war crimes, someone who's been pushed very much by European allies as a pariah, who Trump first threatened. There were supposed to be heavy sanctions. There were not. In fact, he got this meeting. We still have no real details on any sort of real ceasefire. There is none at this point in time. So looking at that as well, I mean, is Putin leading the game here? I mean, it seems also, if we look at the press statement, it was him speaking quite lengthy, Trump usually standing there talking. So looking at all of that packaged together, how do you assess that? I mean, this is still very much, it seems Putin is leading very much the PR war right now. Yeah. How much is that going to impact also any further steps?
I think it will have direct impact over Russia's positioning in an international arena. This is end of international isolation of Putin and of Russia since the beginning of a large-scale invasion of Ukraine. This is another, let's say, another pillar to Russia strengthening its position in so-called global south. Several important countries in global south were still, concerned whether to invite Putin, whether to meet with Putin, how to cooperate with Russia. A lot of them tried to hide their economic cooperation with Russia, not to be sanctioned. And right now, this is a clear signal that this era of isolation is over, because one of the biggest and largest economies in the world, so basically the largest economy in the world, is interested in restoration of economic, political, and diplomatic ties with Russia, despite all the criminal cases, all the arrest warrant, despite the isolation, which was a result of consolidation of the Western or democratic world generally. So I think from this point of view, Putin has overplayed Trump, really. This is a clear KGB tactics when Putin was trying to please politically please Trump. He consciously, in my opinion, repeated several times Trump's quotations. He referred to the fact that the victory from Trump was literally stolen in 2022. So he just pushed the weak places, which matters for Trump. And he succeeded with that. The atmosphere was very loyal to Putin. He was accepted and welcomed. And from this point of view, the outcome, which means no concrete results with conflict resolution with Ukraine, seems something too little if remember what Trump has given Putin politically and in terms of PR for this little outcome to have on the table afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And also interesting because Donald Trump has seemed to kind of now put the emphasis on European allies, on Zelensky, saying they're supposed to deal with it now. We've heard in the last few hours there's been some follow-up calls between Donald Trump and Zelensky and some NATO allies, including President Lavrov. What do you think happened during those calls? I mean, what stage now are the Europeans at, and what is Zelensky's, I think, initial reactions going to be?
I think the demands will be just repeated, which Trump has heard from Putin, and these demands are unchangeable since 2022, and they were repeated in Russian memorandum when the Russian and Ukrainian delegation met in May this year. So these are basically the de facto, or better de jure, recognition of Ukrainian territories to be occupied by Russia. We have new demand here for Ukrainian forces to voluntarily withdraw from the rest of Donetsk region, which Russia, after more than 11 years of war starting from 2014, is not capable, is not able to win over militarily. So now they use Trump to push Ukrainian forces voluntarily from the region. They spoke, and now Trump, I'm sure, will speak with President Zelensky about possible restrictions on defense capabilities and possibly no NATO and probably no other defense or security alliance, because Putin has again underlined that we have generally to deal with the initial source for this conflict. And for Russia, this is Ukraine, who is capable to defend itself, Ukraine which is moving towards European Union, NATO, or any other defense or security alliance, and he needs to eliminate even the perspective of any of this. And I think that clearly the conversation will be pretty like, listen, Vladimir, speaking between Trump and President Zelensky, the ceasefire is possible, but you have to compromise because you don't have those cards which Russia has.
Right.
And unfortunately, this is unfavorable situation for Ukraine. Unfortunately, that Ukraine is not just alone denying from the ceasefire on these unbearable terms, but Ukraine has really more strategic support from European allies here.
Now, Putin said at that press statement, next time in Moscow, Trump said if he wanted to be there, he invited, he would. Was that a distraction? Was there any sincerity in that? I mean, it doesn't look very likely that Zelensky would ever travel to Moscow for a summit.
Zelensky will definitely not travel to Moscow because he will not be able to come back home after this. So even direct meeting, bilateral meeting with Putin is something which is concerning the pretty majority of Ukrainian society. However, any going to Moscow, any travel to Moscow on Russian soil will be considered like a political betrayal and capitulation. And this is why Russia, of course, will be interested in that. And there is no chance any Ukrainian official will do that in the nearest future.
Also, during the statement at the end, Donald Trump said there were some tremendous Russian business leaders there during that talk, so those few hours there. How much of a concern is that this will now impact potentially the United States maybe rolling back sanctions? I mean, that's what Putin wants anyway. So having the presence and having Donald Trump mention this, what's your takeaway from that?
That was one of their main goals, Putin here, not just to restate their political Russian demands towards Ukraine and Europe generally, but also lifting sanctions and restart economic cooperation. And there was the second track of cooperation, or no, actually of negotiations between American delegation and the Russian delegation. It was led by Kirill Dmitriev, who was also a member of Russian delegation. yes, there is a clear signal that Trump does not think that he will be pressing Putin and he will not be pushing Russia by sanctions, by strengthening the sanctions towards more constructive negotiation position, rather the opposite. So no new sanctions will be applied, and there is a high probability that already existing American sanctions will be lifted or isn't. However, the main portion of sanctions are not Americans, they are European. And if Trump restores economic cooperation with Russia or lifts some sanctions, it will mean just a clash between the European position and American position. And this is also in the interest of Russia to destabilize completely what was pretty strong transatlantic consolidation before Trump came into power.
And at this point now, what can Zelensky, what can the Ukrainians do? I mean, they were boxed out of these strategic discussions. Zelensky wasn't there, he was absent. What can Ukraine realistically do now, with the help maybe of European allies? But the question is, what can they do to really coax into some form of a trilateral summit or some more action of Ukraine's involvement?
Trilateral summit will not happen if there is no preliminary agreement of Ukraine to Russia's demands, unfortunately. And if those demands are, as we talked already, about restrictions on Ukrainian defense, on Ukrainians' army, on Ukrainians' sovereign decisions about joining or not joining specific alliances, these concessions will not take place. So from this point of view, Putin will not be interested just to come and go back. He has fulfilled his appetite and his political goals, at least some of them, while meeting Trump, but he doesn't need for any kind of political goals just the meeting with Zelensky and Trump just per se. He would need the capitulation or some kind of concessions on the side of Ukraine to be signed if there is Russia's agreement to a trilateral summit somewhere in the nearest future. What can Ukraine do? Ukraine can certainly not just accumulate European support, but channel what was already agreed on a multilateral level with European partners. Why certain proposals or certain concessions which are proposed to Ukraine right now, why they will not bring the resolution to the conflict, but also they will not serve for even a temporary ceasefire. So only this kind of constructive position will be able to persuade at least somehow Trump that there is no need to sacrifice with something which will not lead to a ceasefire anyway, not even to say about the end of the war. This will not be an easy task, but I think that Ukraine should not politically just say we are against and that's all. No, we have to explain why. We have to explain why withdrawal of Ukrainian forces, for instance, from Donetsk region, this is not just a political issue. This is not just because of Ukrainian constitution, but it has clear military sense. Ukraine has no fortifications strong enough to build a new defense line in Dnipropetrovsk region, in Kharkiv region, in Poltava region. So if let's imagine a hypothetical scenario, Ukrainian forces are withdrawing voluntarily from Donetsk region, they are going to an open terrain. And Russia has an open space to move further. So the conversation should be like this: to persuade Trump that his main goal, a ceasefire, will not be in place anyway if we don't secure this ceasefire by specific instruments. And I do hope that the first signal from US officials that they might be a part of monitoring or verification mission somehow on the ground in Ukraine is kind of slight hope that they will start thinking not just about pleasing Putin or just about thinking how to make a ceasefire more or less stable.
You're just saying some slight hope, looking at the future, but still much work ahead for any kind of ceasefire and all this. But look, thank you so much, Mariya Zolkina. Thank you for coming and sharing your insights. Appreciate it. And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay tuned, much more coming up right here on TVP World. Goodbye.